Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of death metal, checking out music from the genre. We're going to be moving forward into the band Intestine Baalism, which is just these bands, man. Where do they come up with this stuff? The track we're checking out comes off of the Banquets in the Darkness album. It's titled The Planet. So, let's see where Intestine Baalism is taking us today. I was hoping very melodic though. Those little flourishes, we'll have to talk about them. They're all over the place in the guitars. Up on the bellow, the ride cymbal. Oh, really interesting note choices here. Yeah, those dotted accents. Yeah, so this is our same A-B section we had from the beginning. Yeah, interesting. Here's the wild thing. Speed that up by about 25% and ditch the vocals, and I'm going to be on board because it reminds me of a couple of bands that I would never consider death metal, but might have been melodeath adjacent after all. This does feel like it sits a bit more on the palatable side of melodeath, but by definition, it is melodic death metal. It already has palatability baked into it by notion that there's a higher focus on the melodic and harmonic components. It's why melodeath has always consistently been something that has worked for me through the years of doing this. It's a genre I didn't know I liked, and still kind of feel odd saying I do, but has consistently worked. And I don't think this is any different. Now, this song specifically, though, we have an A B A B C A B pattern. There is a variation in our C. We probably pop a D in there, but we do have a bridge that changes things up, and a cycle of verse and chorus that we hear throughout the rest of the track. Our A section is primarily composed of this really neat counterpoint idea that goes on with our two guitars. And our right guitar, let's start with our left guitar. Our left guitar has a pretty standard, I think, dotted quarter note idea, in that the accent shifts from downbeats to offbeats and is showcased primarily against a rigid downbeat accent in our drums. So we get to hear the syncopation against the drums on every other note from the guitars. Oh, no, 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 no. It's kind of swung, isn't it? Bum, 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 bum. Yeah. So there's different weighting on the two. That's what it is. Yeah. So we have three notes of different weight per bar. The first note is dotted, which instigates the syncopation, but then we have a variety of note lengths for note 2 and 3 in a bar that further add on to the interesting accent pattern we get out of it. Anyways, that is our left guitar. They have this one rhythmic idea that is syncopated against our drums, and they take the one idea and they just kind of move through the chord progression on it. They don't really change it much, they just shift the notes based on what chord they're playing. Our right guitar does something similar, but with flourish. They start by harmonizing. They're not playing the exact same notes, but interestingly, on our third note, instead of just holding it out until we get to the downbeat of 1 to start the phrase over again, we usually have a 16th note ornamentation to it. So instead of that bum 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 bum, it's bum bum ba la down, and we get this little trill where we hit the note, we go above it, we come back into it, and then we move into where we're going. And it's really interesting to hear only one of the guitars doing that. It's not really counterpoint by that measure. 95% of what they're doing is the same, just harmonized. But that little flourish changes it up, and on our right guitar does eventually end up playing a different line than our left in the bridge somewhere. So the idea of counterpoint isn't completely absent from the track, and I think this is more of a foreshadowing of the separation of our guitars that we'll further explore later on in the track. But it's a really neat flourish right here. Also, the more I sing that line, I know I'm picking the wrong pitches because it's not the pitches they played. It's the pitches of a different song, and I think even the rhythmic idea might be a little different, but just the entire vibe of it is so reminiscent of this other track, and I can't remember what it's called, and I don't know what band it is, and I don't know what album it's on. But if I can remember, I'll post it down in the I'll do a pinned comment on the video, because this song reminds, like I said at the beginning, it reminds me so much of music that I would not call melodeath, and it's kind of bizarre. Um, but anyways, yeah. So that's our general idea of our A, and then our B shifts to primarily chords, holding out these tones, harmonization between our two guitars. This is also the musical riff, motif, idea, ostinato, whatever you want to call it, that gets played underneath the guitar solos, which makes sense. It has the least movement to it. It is primarily focused on foundation. There isn't a lot of forward momentum. There's barely any hits at all. It is just play the chord, let it ring out, then play the next chord and let it ring out, and nothing to interfere with what the guitar would be doing, and the guitar ends up doing a lot of things in the solo. So it's just a really safe foundation to play over in that regard. We bounce back and forth between both of those, and then we move to the bridge. Before we get into the bridge, though, I want to talk about what our rhythm section is doing in both our A and B section. Our bass is pedal tones, either on quarter notes or eighth notes. I don't know why it continues to disappoint me when metal underutilizes their bass, but it does. I don't think it will ever not disappoint me to hear a song, especially if I'm digging it, and then tune into the bass and realize they're not doing much. Especially worse is when I can envision something that would actually work very well to the credit of the song, not changing it into something. Because often I talk about, I would change this, or I would add strings to this, or I would alter the production here, and then I acknowledge that that would fundamentally change what the song is going for, but it would just work better for my ears. No, in this case, it would actually just embellish upon what they're already attempting to achieve here, and what they're doing fine with the bass as it is, but could be done. I don't. I don't want to use the word better, but I think that's kind of where I want to go, right? It still is only better to my ears. I'm sure there are some people who would prefer the bass to just be static and view this song as perfect as it is, and that is a perfectly acceptable perspective as well. But I could just hear that bass doing more that would complement the rhythmic ideas as well as the melodic ideas that we have going on in a way that doesn't add too much complexity or cover up what the guitars are doing or take focus away from the drums or the vocals. Like, it's just, it's so good. Okay, moving on. That's what the bass is doing though. Drums. Drums are super rigid, which is interesting because I get kind of this, well, the syncopation out of the guitars kind of gives me this punk rock, punk pop kind of thing. Like, musically, if we paired this with a more syncopated drum work, it would make me want to go around skanking, which, if you don't know, is a very punk dance. But, or like a mosh pit. Not really a dance, like a mosh. Anyways, moving on. We're going to get way off topic here. It's really interesting to pair this syncopation against the more rigid drumming I would expect from death metal or black metal. And this creates an interesting schism between the music for me because the guitar, also part of the rhythm section traditionally, is also complicit in this rigidity. As I mentioned, they're just playing straight eighths or straight quarter notes depending on the section. And it's really interesting to hear this division between the flourishy syncopated melodic writing in our guitars and the rigid, just very functional writing of the bass and drums. I wonder if this is what makes it death, if this is what's rooting it in that death metal element. And, we are in a subgenre of death, I think. Melodeath, I still am convinced, but I think this is what pulls it into that death metal element before we go into what subgenre it is. It's kind of punky in some ways. kind of dancey in others, but there's this really heavy metal element underneath it all. And I think it's that just functional rigidity in our rhythm section. Although we also can't ignore the vocals here, which are just guttural. I can't understand a word they're saying. It reminds me of Keo's growls from Deer and Gray when he gets into that really low one, and it just sounds like rumbling. And that's exactly what this is. It is just a rumble. I can't hear enunciation. I can't hear rhythm. I can just hear this fog. I can't see what it is. It's kind of amorphous. It's just kind of there and then it's not. And you can recognize when there's no growling, but you can't really recognize what the growling is, what form it's taking, what its rhythm is, what's being said. It is certainly my least favorite aspect of the track for a lot of personal bias reasons. Just not big on growls, not big on poor enunciation. I'm not big on muddy vocals. Not big on muddy production at all. It hits a lot of things I'm not a big fan of, which is really interesting because it's paired with music that I kind of enjoyed, right? So I mean, this is something that I consistently have a problem with when it comes to melodeath, and I think I've consistently spoken about this in the past, where the music I can usually get into and the vocals I can't. And yeah, no different here. So we've covered our A and our B section. We bring us to our C, and this is the big departure. We have a solo, and then we have a couple of new riffs that lead us back into our A section that take us to our final chorus. The latter half of this bridge, with the new guitar riffs, there isn't much different there. The big difference is that our two guitars are doing separate ideas. They're still closely related, but rather than playing 95% the same thing like we heard in our A, it's more like they're playing 60%, and they do deviate enough that I would call them at least a pure variation or maybe even a completely separate idea on our second guitar. It is a neat adaptation, and I think it works well both in isolation in itself. I think it's a neat riff, and it works well as we continue on and push through to the song and return back to that unified A idea that we had. The bass and drums are doing what they're doing, the growling's doing what it's doing. What I find most interesting about this is the guitar solo. It started off feeling very much at home with where we were at. Then it started pulling in notes from outside the key. And then it went to a completely different mode for a second before reining it back in and synchronizing back with our general key and mode of the song, all the while consistently increasing the rhythmic complexity of, well, I should say the speed, not rhythmic complexity, the speed of the solo, where we kind of start out a bit slower and have these longer notes and kind of have these peaks and valleys where we'll speed up and then slow down or pause for a second and speed up and slow down. But as we get more and more into this, and as they choose to be a bit more complex with their mode and note choicing, we also increase the speed of the notes, which is a really smart thing. As I've said in the past, if you're going to bring in dissonant tones or dissonant notes into your melody, it's best to hit them and get off as quickly as you can so that you can bring in the flavor of the note without the dissonance of the note. Increasing the speed of your playing or decreasing how long the note exists while you're beginning to include more and more odd notes is definitely the right way to go about it. From this point on, though, about the last half of the solo, it just kind of hits sort of a shreddy mode, but does a nice little cool down period at the end to bring us into that second half of our bridge with the new riff. I thought that was actually a pretty smooth transition between the two, and our movement back into A was rather smooth as well. So I like the structural writing on this. I think everything works very well together. Each section has its own identity without feeling like a homogeneous sound where it's just one feeling for the entire track. Everything feels distinct but connected. And I think, at least to me, that's a really important quality to have. And that wraps up the composition. The production, though, actually had me a little worried. See, Despite introducing this video as the next in the death metal series, as soon as I heard that intro, I was like, oh man, they got me listening to black metal. And I completely forgot that we were doing death metal week. I legitimately thought we were going to be doing some lo-fi black metal. I was surprised with the direction things took compositionally, but the production is still very lo-fi. And when I go check out the lyrics, I'm going to have to double check this. YouTube says it came out in 2016. And if so, this is apparently a very specific uh, choice that they made. I don't know if they had a record label. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's released by a record label now. That doesn't necessarily mean they had a label when they made the album. So I don't know what their funding was. I don't know what their resources were. But 2016, you could definitely make something a bit higher fidelity in your bedroom with no cash other than to pick up an audio workstation. Um, I suppose you'd need a computer too. It's kind of weird, right? At one point in time, every household had a computer, and I was just kind of expected that that would be the future as technology became cheaper. But eventually, there was this shift where everybody had phones and tablets, and now the expectation to have a computer in your house and all you need to buy is the software for it is missing. And while there is audio workstations for stuff like iPad, it's not as prevalent of a software niche in Android. Anyways, I'm way off topic now, but like that's kind of a weird thing, right? At least it's weird to me. I mean, I'm a millennial, right? I grew up before computers were like really big in households. Uh, and then I grew up when every house was supposed to. Anyways, I'm getting off topic again. Jeez, I just told myself. Back on this though, 2016, I definitely think, regardless of pretty much any situation, um, well, I take that back. Not regardless of any situation, but I think for majority of situations, achieving a more clear production would have been feasible, which makes me think that this was an intentional choice. That's where I was going with all of this. And so I have to ask, why? Why are all of the instruments so separate from themselves? Our two guitars are panned hard left and hard right. Our vocals are pushed way down. I think some of that is just the range of it. It already feels low, but the vocals they don't feel above the song, they feel below the song. Specifically with all of our center channel stuff, our drums and our bass, they both feel above the vocals, which is a really interesting way to produce a track. It absolutely works here and kind of helps me to ignore the vocals, which, yeah, for better or worse. I feel bad saying that I'm ignoring an aspect that somebody put hard work into a work of art, but man, I've just hit so many things I'm not a huge fan of when it comes to vocal timbres. Um, but then the drums are kind of muted and flat, other than I forgot to talk about the ride cymbal. Nothing really special about it, but the fact that that ride cymbal, he's hitting the bell on it against that sort of punky melody going on in the guitars is something that just really hits this memory of the song, and I hope I figure it out. Like I said, I'll put it in the comments for sure, but that bell on the ride cymbal is a part of this song that I'm remembering that I don't think is death metal. Anyways, but yeah, the cymbals are kind of bright and clear, but everything else is a bit muddier and compressed. That's the word I want. The bass is a bit muddy, kind of pushed down in the mix. You really got to listen for the bass, especially against the vocals and the bass kick, which are already filling out that low end space. But the guitars are also kind of compressed and narrow. They're very narrow for being pushed out so far. Normally, you would push instruments that far to create space between instruments, either because you're trying to achieve the sound of a stage, or you are recording a stage and you're naturally getting that space between the instruments. The other reason would be to make space for sound. If you have a massive guitar sound, you need to have room for that. So you'll push it out a little bit, and that empty space between the instruments will be filled with the reverb, the width of the instrument. Here, they're kind of pushed out, but they're very narrow, tinny sounds. They don't have a lot of width to them, and thus it ends up just feeling like there's all this empty space there. So we have a song that feels compressed, but compressed in a way that's empty. And usually compression is to make something feel smaller yet bigger, and this feels smaller and emptier. It's just a very interesting production in that it feels like lo-fi black metal through the lens of clear melodic death metal, and it just comes out unique. I don't think we've heard a band's production like this. This is very, at least to my ears, not having a lot of metal experience, very Intestine Baalism. And of course, the final question is always, what does this song say to me? And I don't know. Like a lot of, we've had this discussion all week. This just feels like metal to me. Um, it kind of is lethargic though. It doesn't have the drive I would expect from the melodic and rhythmic ideas that I'm hearing out of the guitars. And so it feels like it's dragging a bit. And that's why I had mentioned earlier, if you had bumped the tempo up by about 25% and gotten rid of the vocals, then I would really enjoy the song. It feels like it's a bit slower than the song wants to be, which creates another sense of friction. In fact, there's just a lot of friction in this track. A lot of things that go against my expectations in ways that diminish the effects of the song. The guitars would probably their melody would probably contribute a little bit more if they were widened and allowed for the guitar tones to have a bit more presence in the track. The vocals could probably have a little bit more impact if there was enunciation. I don't even need to hear the words specifically. I like to hear syllables, but I don't necessarily need to hear them. But being able to hear the stops and starts between at least words, sentences, lines, so it doesn't just sound like one run on noise with a stop at the end every couple of seconds, would help with its contribution to the rhythmic structure of the song. Which I'm curious where it lies on. Is it more rigid like our rhythm section? Is it more syncopated like our melodic work? I don't know. I couldn't hear it. So I thought that would be really cool. Um, the drumming could have a bit more punch to it, which would increase the impact of the song. It's called The Planet, and it sounds weak, and maybe that's the purpose. We'll hit the lyrics, and maybe it's about a dying planet. But my first guess is, hey, this is about a giant celestial body, and it's filled with space. It's kind of empty. And again, maybe that could be the artistic drive as well, but it just goes against my expectations in a way that I think kind of subtracts from the song. There's a lot of really cool ideas in here that just don't always work together. I think the two guitars with the flourishes in the right during our A section is one of those parts that really works and elevates that melodic riff in our A section. I wish we had seen more of that cooperative work between ideas throughout more of the song. Let me hit the lyrics here and we'll wrap this up. Interesting. So, our verses speak about the hypocrisy of eating animals. From both, it seems, a conservationalist angle and from a religious one. Verse 2 says, "Fools say that life is important or that God blesses us, having eaten so many lives by themselves. Fools won't hesitate to kill and eat animals that plead for their lives. They do so just for their survival." And even leans into this in verse 3. It says, "The euphoria of killing creatures. It is the joy of contributing to the planet." It speaks about the circle of life and how it is a natural part of the planet, and that anybody who tries to stop it is a fool, as stated twice there. Either a fool or a hypocrite. But what I don't get is the chorus. It says, "The planet itself is abnormal. Abandon the stupid lesson. To kill creatures is to contribute to the planet. The number of lives should be reduced." And I'm trying to figure out what the stupid lesson is it's alluding to. Unless they're speaking about the idea that people say we shouldn't eat animals or hunt animals or kill animals. I don't know. And I tried to look back towards the music to see if there's anything in there, and I don't feel anything in the music that would help elevate any of this or allow me to interpret it through a specific emotive light. Um, so I don't know where to stand on this, and I don't know what to take away from it. They're obviously advocating for hunting and killing animals as part of the circle of life. It's the truth of this planet, that it's necessary for the planet to move on. Calls it the contribution to the planet, which makes sense. The circle of life is very important to most ecosystems. But the chorus still kind of leaves me a little baffled. I did check the release date here. It is 2003. That is much earlier than the 2016 YouTube was signifying, which again, I don't know why it's so hard to get a date right. It really isn't difficult. Just use a scraper. There's so many websites that track this data. I'm sure one of them has an API. You can get it right every time. Or at least a vast majority of the time. More accurate than what it is now, which feels like it's never accurate. But 2003 definitely recontextualizes some of the ideas I said about the production, and it recontextualizes some of the concepts I had mentioned about the composition, because I was viewing it as a more modern piece and another decade's worth of influence that it could have had. Um, and, access to technology and stuff. 2003, I'm not sure that bedroom production was as strong as it is today. So yeah, take what I said about that stuff with a grain of sand. I thought it was 13 years younger than it was. Those are my thoughts on Intestine Baalism's The Planet. This is where y'all come in. Let me know. Did you enjoy this? Anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Let me know. We got a special selection today. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow to wrap this whole week up. We'll check out our final death metal track, our final special selection, and check out our creator request. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos. I can't find the button, and I don't want to look away. Here we go.